acceptance. Diversity is acceptance.
Diversity is life.
Diversity is understanding.
Diversity is priceless.
Acceptance.
All people working together.
Infinite.
Unity. Most definitely unity.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Diversity Leadership Alliance 2022 webinar series on equity and social justice. After 20 years of driving progress through DEI, the conversations continue, and now we moved into action. 2022 is the year of having brave conversations that turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. My name is Tondra Richardson, the Director of Student Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Phoenix. I'm a proud DLA board member and also the chair of the DLA Education Committee. Welcome. At Diversity Leadership Alliance, our goal has always been to provide a forum for diversity and inclusion dialogue, as well as offer learning opportunities to enhance professional development, understanding, promotion, and management of diversity as an essential part of business success. We believe that organizations that understand, recognize, and value diversity can attract and retain top talent, as well as have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Though these monthly webinars, our annual conference, workshops, and youth outreach, or through these, we provide a safe space and platform to have critical conversations that impart change. 2022 is the year that we raise our collective voices loud enough to drown out the hate. The time is now to have brave conversations that begin to unravel the havoc that racism has wreaked throughout our beloved community and country. Before we continue, I just want to make an appeal to all of those who are joining us today. At the end of this workshop, we are going to share some information on our Education Committee. Our Education Committee is responsible for pulling together the content for these wonderful workshops, and we hope that you can join us as a volunteer in helping us to pull together the content, work on technology, and we also offer several other professional development opportunities. So be on the lookout for that at the end. I'd also now like to give our land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge and identify the Indigenous peoples, nations, and histories within our area. We acknowledge the Akimel Udhem, Pipash, and Yavapai. We acknowledge these people, their ancestors, their descendants, and the land itself. At DLA, we're all about progression, and we want our DLA community to know that we are working to move beyond just an acknowledgement into actions that we can also include for our Indigenous community. I do apologize that a previous engagement will prevent me from being with you for the duration of the program, but you're in for a treat today. To help me continue the program and tell you more about this month's workshop, I'd like to welcome our Executive Director of DLA, Joanna Deshay. And before I do that, and before I drop this call, I want to wish everyone a happy Native American Heritage Month. Joanna?
Wonderful, wonderful. Tondra, always a delight. It has just been glorious working with you this year. I know you've got to run to something else. So to you, happy Thanksgiving to your family, and enjoy that next week. So cheers to you. Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to have you here. And can you believe this is the last workshop of the year? We worked so hard during the year, and this is just wonderful to be at the end and just be kind of wrapping it up with the same individual, Dr. Renee Bhatti-Klug, that actually started us off this year. This is the last webinar in our DLA 2022 Brave Conversation series. And it's all about understanding how to address inequities. And even more than that, how to become change advocates in your workplace. Before we begin, I just want to do our obligatory reminder to all of you that I'll start to use my new word I used yesterday, which is we are a kindness community. And even more than that, we want to ensure that our programs and events are always inviting, respectful, and accessible to all. So with that, I would love to just read some quick rules of engagement. You'll see them up in the chat area, but I just want to remind everyone to make sure that you keep it positive, right, and productive. Listen actively so you can hear everyone's perspectives. Commit to foster greater empathy. Empathy is my word for the day. We were talking about words in the chat. Also, try to relinquish the need to be right. Ask questions, be respectful, don't dominate the chat, approach others with kindness and love in your comments. And just remember that as a community space, if we feel like we're being disrespectful and not being kind, we do reserve the right to remove you. So this presentation is being recorded, and that by entering the event, you as participants are consenting to being recorded and for the recorded presentation to be shared on our Diversity Leadership Alliance webpage, YouTube channel, and other professional media that we use to promote the event. So just want to make sure I put it out there. As you have seen on all of our workshops, including on the conference, we are so thrilled with the partnership that we've had over the last few years with our equal access services interpreters. And joining us are two of our old school, right? Well, look, Heather and Liz, you all are old school now. Heather Ivy and Liz Roberson, who will be interpreting for us today. And I would be remiss if I didn't take just a few minutes to thank Mr. Dave Wallenhop from Equal Access for all of the years of continued partnership and support. We are so grateful. So to Heather and to Liz, thank you, thank you. We value your time. And so what we would love for you all to do is there's a survey at the end that we would love for you to click on. Your thoughts matter. We want to know what you think. How's this environment? Are we all like over the Zoom thing? Do we want to do hybrid? And there's some questions in there that help us kind of get better, right? Elevate the experience for all of you. So if you would just click on that link at the end of today's webinar and go ahead and take the survey, we would be ever so grateful. So with that, let us begin. We started the year with Dr. Bhatti-Klug, who led us, and I should say the newly minted, I just love saying that, Renee, so I'm going to call you Dr. Bhatti-Klug from now on, so who led us through the idea of cultural intelligence. So that is how we started the year in January. And in today's interactive workshop, we're going to come full circle, and you as participants will understand how to build on that cultural intelligence and address inequities, and also how to change, right, to become an advocate in your workplace. We're going to apply the culturally intelligent strategies, and at the end, you guys are in for such a treat. You will receive actual practical tools that you can implement immediately in your personal life, in the community, within your organizations, in order to, make that environment transform. And so we're really excited that we get a chance to have this digital interactive guide. Thank you very much, Renee. So grateful for that. And so with that, I would like to introduce you to our presenter that will be guiding our conversation this morning. Please meet Dr. Renee Bhatti-Klug, who is the founder and chief trainer at Culturally Intelligent Training and Consulting. It is a DEI firm that equips individuals to demonstrate CI organizationally through cultural audits, comprehensive training, accountability tools, and DEI committees. She is an innovative educational leader and researcher who is committed to building people-centered curricula and fostering inclusive environments. Renee serves as Arizona State University's senior university educator, administering trainings and accountability tools to faculty and staff. Renee has lived in England and France, and I'm so envious. Every time I read this, I'm like, I would have loved this, and have backpacked through Europe, kayaked in Fiji, and trained teachers in Madagascar. She lives with her husband, who is a pianist and composer, and their 3 children here in her hometown in Phoenix, Arizona. A warm and gracious DLA welcome on this, our last workshop of the year, to Dr. Renee Bhatti-Klug. Welcome, Renee. Good to see you.
Hi, thanks so much, Joanna. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And as a reminder, Brent in the chat just shared the guide that I would love for you to first download and save. That's how you'll be able to access all of the interactive elements, the page numbers, and everything. I also have another line of business. I would love to invite you to participate in our poll everywhere if you're with us here live. If you're with us asynchronously, thank you so much for watching this webinar, but the poll everywheres will not be available. And so my friends will be sharing in the chat another way, or how to share, how to access the poll everywhere. And I can start it off real quickly and then we'll go from there. So I'm happy to be with you all again. This is my third time with DLA and my second time here, and I'll talk to you about what that trajectory looked like this year. And so today I'm going to walk you through answering the question, do you want to become an anti-racist advocate? And I really want to also dig in deeper to some of us with regards to our levels of power. So this year in January, as Joanna said, I did kick off the series with cultural intelligence, sharing a model I developed that provides a practical way forward in demonstrating inclusion and creating cultures of belonging. I will review that model quickly in just a moment. Then in February, Eric Bailey guided us through an interactive discussion on practical brain science and psychology to navigate critical conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI. In March, Joanna moderated a powerful panel discussion surrounding women in leadership. In April, my friend and one of my mentors, Dr. Jeff McGee, discussed how to close racial leadership gaps. In June, Bert Verkhammer shared a new approach to DEI work via global inclusion. In August, Savannah Romero and Maria Givens reminded us how to authentically include members of tribal and indigenous communities. And then in September, Deanna Singh asserted the power of action. In October, they had the DLA conference. Fortunately, I was in Paris, but unfortunately, that meant that I couldn't be with you. But today, I'm back with you to wrap up this series and remind you about the importance of accountability in anti-racist action. I'm a broken record when it comes to accountability. And as Joanna said, I'm the founder and chief facilitator for Culturally Intelligent Training and Consulting, CITC, and at Arizona State University, I had a promotion. I'm now the director of advocacy initiatives, and I'm pleased to bring a lot of the work that you see here to faculty and staff as well as students. So again, and Brent might share this again, the guide in the chat, it's a PDF. Please make sure that you download it and save it first. Don't just open it up. A lot of things will not be accessible in terms of interaction. The guide is optional for you to use. I will not be collecting it. It is here to provide you ongoing tools, to provide you reminders and prompts to see if you can operationalize the information that I'm giving you in an ongoing way. On the PowerPoint, you'll see a prompt here in the tan color that shows you the connecting pages on the guide. And I'll try to verbally remind you of that as well. Brent just shared that. And the guide is also available for all of our asynchronous webinar participants underneath the video. So in taking a look very quickly at the cultural intelligence or CI model that my team and I have been developing over the last 5 years, and we've tested it for validity with about 1,000 different participants. What we need to understand about cultural intelligence is that it is our ability to understand how we feel, think, and act when we are engaging with people who are different than we are. Cultural intelligence is rooted in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is our ability to understand how we're feeling, how we're going to behave when we're engaging with someone. Sometimes that might mean that we escalate a situation, perhaps if it is in intervening or standing up for justice. In other cases, we want to perhaps de-escalate. Maybe that would be at Thanksgiving when we just want to get to the pie and not talk about political acrimony. It can go either way with different people. However, emotional intelligence is most often demonstrated when we are engaging with people who are similar to us. What that means is as we inhabit a lot of cultural and social identities. It comprises intersectionality. We are never just one thing, we are many. So we have our ethnic heritage, and to self-identify, I'm Punjabi, Irish, Polish, and French. I'm a first-generation American. My dad immigrated here from India in the 60s. It's also our gender identities, our sexual orientations, our age, the generation which we were born and which we grew up impacts how we view the world and how we communicate, and our level of access to different kinds of technologies, even experiences, our ability, whether or not we have any disabilities, whether those be physical, invisible, or visible, whether those be mental or emotional neurodiversity. So when we are moving outside of some of those social or cultural identities that we have, now we're engaging cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is comprised of 3 different cultural capabilities. Each of these capabilities is guided by a respective value. The first capability, which all of you are demonstrating by being with us here today, is cultural openness. This is rooted in the how we feel aspect of CI, and this is our willingness to learn not just about others, but also ourselves. It's our ability to ascertain our knowledge gaps, to ask questions, and therefore it is guided by the value of curiosity. The second capability is rooted in how we think. It is cultural awareness, and this is what we're going to be engaging a lot today. This is the active process of learning about ourselves and others. It is ongoing. It adds upon each other. I don't think it ever, I hope it never stops. I certainly know that it doesn't stop for me. This is guided by the value of empathy, which I define as perspective taking. There's cognitive empathy, which is perspective taking, affective or emotional empathy, which is feeling what somebody else is feeling. And there's behavioral empathy, which is doing that which you've learned to demonstrate that that empathy is real. I focus primarily on cognitive empathy because affective or emotional empathy can really be quite a drain and can prevent us from moving forward into action. And behavioral empathy, I define actually as compassion, which I'll get to in just a moment. The third cultural capability and rooted in how we act is cultural responsiveness. And this is our demonstrating inclusive action based on what we've learned. If we just do something for someone without knowing what they actually need, that is a lot like colonialism. It is asserting our power, our privilege, our influence in a way that somebody might not need or appreciate. However, if we've learned from them through cultural awareness, then we can just demonstrate responsiveness. And this is guided by the value of compassion, again, which I define as empathy in action. People ask me all the time, how do I know that empathy is real? I know that empathy is real when you've demonstrated it via compassion. So this is a very high overview of the CI model. Again, you can take a look at the January 2022 webinar featured on the DLA website, along with all of the other webinars, to engage that content a little bit more robustly. So all of this and engaging CI, and again, today we're going to primarily be engaging cultural awareness and cultural responsiveness. I believe that this allows us to demonstrate the outcomes, not the intentions, according to Lily Zhang, of DEI. And if you see here, there's a Venn diagram with there's 3 circles overlapping each other with the acronym DEI in the center. At the top is cultural openness, to the right is cultural awareness, and to the left is cultural responsiveness. These circles are overlapping, and there are arrows that begin with cultural openness and lead to awareness, responsiveness, and back to openness. Because I believe that as we engage CI, we begin to, let me pause there, as we begin to demonstrate CI individually, we begin to operationalize DEI organizationally. We have to have accountability individually and then hold each other accountable corporately to truly diffuse DEI throughout an organization. DEI, as I define it, diversity, really is just a fact. We are a diverse people, specifically if we are situated in the United States. What we're really going for is representation. Do people within leadership represent the constituents they serve? Do we have diversity in racial representation, gender representation, sexual orientation, age, ability? If we don't, we need to address this first. Then we move into equity, which is very different than equality. Equality is treating everyone the same. Equity is making sure that everybody has access to the same things. And the reason we want to ensure equity is for inclusion. Inclusion is an atmosphere in which all people feel valued, respected, and like they belong. And belonging then is the feeling of security and support when there is a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group, when an individual can bring their authentic self to work. Now, I will say that part of compassion is boundaries, and we can't always bring our whole selves to work because not everybody deserves to see it, and we don't have to. But insofar as we feel psychologically safe and that there has been created an atmosphere of equity and inclusion, we should feel a sense of belonging. This is really what we're going for, because we learned in 2021 and into 2022 as part of the Great Resignation, in which in the United States alone, over 4% of the population, and of that percentage, these were primarily Black women who also identified as mothers, left the workplace. The results, as taken in a Catalyst survey in 2021, showed that most people left their jobs because of lack of empathetic leadership and cultures of belonging. So today, I'm going to talk to you about how we get to this place where we truly do advocate for cultural responsiveness so we can have anti-racist organizations. We'll take a look at the stories we're told and how to notice bias. Then we'll look at origin stories and recognizing bias. Then the stories we tell and understanding racism. As we move toward cultural responsiveness, we'll learn how to tell true stories to understand anti-racism. And finally, I will give you strategies for becoming an anti-racist advocate, no matter your levels of power within your organization or community. So in taking a look at cultural awareness and noticing bias, we'll examine how society, media, and corporate culture has influenced our narratives. So here are the stories we're told. You can follow along on guide page 6. For any of you who are coming in new, please download and save this guide first. So bias, and we'll look at this a little bit later, is an unreasoned and unfair distortion of judgment in favor of or against a person or thing. So in looking at how it can very much be against, we're going to start here with ageism. I mentioned how generation is part of our social and cultural identities. And ageism is discrimination against, exclusion, not inclusion. We want inclusion, exclusion of, an unfair assessment of, or discriminatory language about someone because of their age. This article from Forbes provides excuses that companies give for hiring people who are all of a similar age, maybe let's say within a generation of give or take 20 years. A lot of people cite culture fit or relevant skills, assuming skills of people among different generations. They also sometimes cite that certain people can't keep up with the fast pace. A lot of those might be embedded in ageism against people who might be of the boomer or even the Gen X generations. A lot of people even embed sexism in eschewing having an office mom, even saying that if a woman who identifies as being a bit older somehow is now going to take a role of being the mom, which is quite an unfair assumption. But also recognize for those of us who are born in younger generations, sometimes there's assumption about us, about our experience, about our work ethic. And I will say on both sides, wherever you fall on that spectrum, it is not okay to be labeled in accordance with when you were born, because every one of us, despite when we were born, might engage our culture, our technology, our workplaces differently. And when we see ageism coming up, particularly in hiring and also in inclusion in everyday practices in the workplace, it is a mayday. And I will say that of the biases, and this I believe Eric Bailey pointed out in February, of all of the biases and the isms that are demonstrated in the United States specifically, ageism is the one that is most overlooked. And so I center it here for you today. And then we have ableism. And this is the discrimination against, exclusion of, unfair assessment of, and discriminatory language about someone because of a visible or invisible disability, including physical impairment, neurodiversity, or emotional disorder. Neurodiversity includes facial movements, tone of voice, and different ways of learning or creating. We can see that so often in tech, there's algorithmic bias that hurts people with disabilities. There also are a lot of tests, especially in some engineering fields that have been around since the 70s, that test people's strength, which not only impacts those who might be differently abled, but also maybe people who identify as female and who don't have, not all females do, but sometimes they're unfair assessments. So sometimes quote unquote successful candidates don't receive accurate measurements because of their neurodiversity, because tests often center those in the dominant majority. People who think very similarly, people who have been trained up in an educational system that has asked them to think and test a certain way, to the exclusion of so many others. What we want, therefore, and what I'm asking you as anti-racist advocates, is to consider accessibility and not accommodations when you are creating spaces. That if we focus on access and not just accommodation, it will provide so many people the opportunity to engage where their disability is not centered, but their ability is celebrated. There are some organizations this year alone that when they've had people with disabilities onboarded, they redesigned their offices. This is an asset to the entire community. Next, we have sexism, and sexism is discrimination against, exclusion of, unfair assessment of, or discriminatory language about someone on the basis of their gender identity, whether that's a biological sex or whether that is a gender identity through any mechanism. We have sexism that is prevalent in so many cultures. And specifically, according to this article that is here, we see that a lot of women have sidestepped the idea of sexism by sometimes adopting masculine names. There is an author, her name is Austin Channing Brown. Her parents gave her the name Austin so she could get into the interview. That was simply why they did that. I'm also going to mention the intersectionality that Austin is not only an identifying female, but also a Black woman. And so both of those things might prevent her in any situation, if there is bias present, from even accessing an interview after somebody might perceive and view her resume and assume things about her on the basis of her sex or race. When we have technology and Amazon, they had AI recruiting technology that predominantly trained on men's resumes. So if they were only being trained on men's resumes, this is to the exclusion of so many women. And Facebook had targeted ads to men only. So we see here that gender issues are nothing new. They've gone on for not just decades, but centuries. And now we want to make sure that we are aligning our practices with making sure that we have inclusion of all genders and that we are not making assumptions. I've worked with a lot of CEOs and C-suite organizations in the last several years. And in one, they had an entirely male C-suite. The C-suite are all of the people who have the chief level titles. There was a new chief officer who was onboarded, who happened to be the first female ever to be a chief member of that organization. On her first day at an executive level meeting, the men asked her to take notes. She looked at them, a little aghast, and said, "Who's been taking notes thus far?" And I said, "Well, nobody." She goes, "Well, then I'm not going to be doing it either. You need to get an administrative assistant who has been hired to do that task." She had to advocate for herself. Please avoid that. Finally, we have racism here, which is not the final ism, but it is one of the four that I'll be centering today. Racism, thus, is the discrimination against, exclusion of, unfair assessment of, or discriminatory language about someone based on their ethnic or racial identities. Recognizing here, as Dr. Jeff McGee shared with us in April, that race is a construct. Ethnicities, though, are not. Those are the DNA, the heritage that we have based on our parental or our generational countries of origin. And many of us have many ethnicities that make up who we are. So I don't know if many of you remember, I certainly remember this about 20 years ago, across the country and perhaps the world, there were faucet and paper towel dispensers that were installed in public bathrooms throughout the country. Many people, when they put their hands under those dispensers, nothing came out. The reason for that was a near-infrared technology glitch that did not recognize people with darker skin tones. For those of you who can't see me, I have a darker olive skin tone. And for people with skin tones like mine and even darker, it did not activate that technology. Now, this, of course, is a bias that's rooted in exclusion of people at the table to test that machinery before it was installed in thousands upon thousands of public restrooms. The author of this article says that this introduces the more pervasive problem of technology being constructed without paying mind to the diversity of bodies it is built to serve. I want to remind those of you that yes, does it require time and resources to test on a multitude of people? Yes, but is that more resourceful than having to rip out all of this technology after the fact? My argument is yes. Now, it's not just these dispensers. In 2010, Xbox Connect had a lot of racial discrimination in its ability to engage people across races. Hewlett-Packard had facial recognition software that did not recognize faces of color, as did Flickr's auto tagging feature. So we want to make sure that embedded in all of our technologies and our practices, we are making sure that we're accounting for many of the faces, voices, bodies that are being served. Are they being represented? I would like to invite you to participate now in Poll Everywhere. Again, this is for our live participants. You can do it one of three ways. And I appreciate all of you who also shared in the chat. I saw racism, and I see a lot of racism. I don't see racism in the chat. I see people who mention that racism is the bias that they see most often displayed. So, and that seems to be true for those online as well. Thank you for your participation. 40% of you said racism, and there is representation everywhere else except for in ageism, which is fascinating based on some of the data that says that ageism is one of the most prevalent isms that appears in the workplace. All right, friends, are we going to put bets down on whether or not the next poll is going to work? All right, here we go. Is it, whoa, it's already there. Do you speak up when you witness bias? Always? Most of the time, not as often as I'd like, or never? Again, you're welcome to share in the chat as well. Take about 20 more seconds. I'm so happy that Poll Everywhere is working. I've got a lot of polls today because I would love to hear your feedback. Okay, 5 more seconds. So thank you for your honesty. What you're demonstrating here is cultural humility. And 64% of you said not as often as I'd like. And then 18% each said always and most of the time. I want to say thank you for those of you who always do it. And even most of the time do it. And for those of you not as often as you'd like, I hope to give you some tips today on how to do it. But being bold and being brave is a good first start. And honestly, practicing beforehand. Practicing beforehand. I'm going to say it right now in case I forget to say it later. And if I remember to say it later, you're welcome, because the human brain has to hear something 7 times before it remembers. I hear somebody in the, I read somebody in the chat says, depends on the situation. There's been times where I felt as if I said something, I would be threatened or targeted. I appreciate that honesty, and I absolutely agree that that can absolutely be the case. Where if you say something, and this signifies to me that there might be toxic leadership at place here, and there's a toxic systemic issue. That's an assumption, but it's an assumption based in many years of experience with this. So thank you for that. Next, what do you wish you knew more about when it comes to addressing bias? Different kinds of biases, how bias is prevalent in various fields, tech, academia, business, how to notice bias, how to notice when I'm being biased, and how to speak up when I witness bias occurring. We'll be addressing some of this today. Take about 10 more seconds. So 55% of you want to know how to speak up, 32% how bias is prevalent, and 14% the different kinds, which of course we went through and we talked about. We'll unpack that a little bit more, and I'll talk about that as we go through. And then final question in this portion, again, keep this up as we will have more questions later, including that racism one that comes up in a little bit. Are you willing to be an anti-racist advocate? I'll give you about 10 seconds. Some of you already are here. "100% of you said yes, and this brings me great joy. So here we go. Here are our origin stories and looking at cultural awareness and recognizing bias. How did we get to these stories? Let's look at how we're wired. Biologically, yes, as Eric Bailey talked about in February, but also culturally, socially, and personally. This, if you're following along, is on guide page 7. So Nelson Mandela said this. Nelson Mandela was a South African leader who was reared in apartheid and was pivotal in bringing South Africa out of that during the 90s. So he says, on the first day of school, my teacher gave each of us an English name and said that from thenceforth that the name we would answer to in school, that this was the name we would answer to in school. This was the custom among Africans in those days and was undoubtedly due to the British bias of our education. In education, so often there's a bias in which whatever might be difficult for the dominant culture gets put on the students in this case, where the students now bear the burden of having to go by a different name because their names are, quote, too hard to pronounce or too ethnic. There's a bias that comes up so often. I was doing a presentation with about 200 people on the call back in August. And so many people shared their stories growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even 2000s of their teachers saying, well, this is going to be your name because I can't say your name, or your name and some sort of word that was quite maligning. Your name sounds weird. And these are not terms that we want to be using. And we want to honor people's names and practice when we can. So in taking a look at attitudes of mind, Merriam-Webster has a really good breakdown of these attitudes of mind. And there are 4 that I'll be going over with you today, again on page 7 of your guide. The first is a predilection. Predilections are our strong likings that are derived from our temperament or experiences. There are no right or wrongs in our predilections. These can focus on our favorite foods, where we like to travel, our favorite colors, the smells that we love. Sometimes smells even, I know this is true for myself, can take me back to a particular memory. I know that there's a flower that was very pungent during my grandmother's death. She died when I was, I think, 7 or 8. It was about 40 years ago. To this day, I have instructed my loved ones, including my spouse, not to buy me this particular flower because my association with it is death. So I've made it explicit in saying, okay, don't do this. And they don't, because if they want to express love to me and that kind of thing. That's a predilection of mine that was based in one of my experiences. Now, I've had a favorite color since I was 16. That's just temperament. So if you like spicy foods, all of these kinds of things, these are predilections. And most of us have them. Some of us are neutral, and that's okay too. The second attitude of mind is a prepossession. This is an attitude, belief, or impression that's been formed beforehand, all right? And it's a fixed conception likely to preclude objective judgment of anything counter to it. So prepossessions is when you've got a strong opinion about a subject or a person, despite having little information or direct experience, right? This is a prepossession. The next attitude of mind is prejudice. And this is an unfavorable prepossession that connotes a feeling rooted in suspicion, fear, or intolerance. Again, often now we're understanding the origins of why we tell the stories we do about people. When we talk about prejudice, when we say, well, they do this, or I don't trust this person because of X, or if we have racial groups, if you're talking about gender, well, in the case of the corporate executive, female who I talked about. The story that was being told about her by her male colleagues was that women ought to be taking notes, even if they are our peers. And the men themselves were not taking those notes. In another situation, a woman executive, different company, same situation. She was asked to fetch coffee. Beforehand, the men had gotten their own coffee because they were fully able to do that. So these are the stories we tell about people. And then we burden them with the prejudices and the prepossessions we have. The final attitude of mind is bias. Bias is an unreasoned or unfair distortion of judgment in favor of or against a person or thing. Now, the main difference between bias and prejudice is that bias is an inclination for or against a person, idea, or thing, especially in a way considered to be unfair. Whereas prejudice is a preconceived notion that is not based on actual experience or reason or prepossession. All right. So prejudice is not based in any experience. Bias, there is experience that's incorporated there. Now, I want to quote from you something very important about bias from my friend and colleague at ASU, Dr. Kimberly Scott. And she focuses on maladaptive biases. If we have a brain, we have bias. And sometimes our biases help us make educated and discerning decisions. But our maladaptive biases are what we want to avoid. Maladaptive biases might be locking the car door or pulling our belongings closer to us on an elevator if we see somebody walk in and based on their gender, their skin color, any sort of a visible kind of description or descriptor there, we feel unsafe. We don't know the person. That's a maladaptive bias. But a bias we might have that could serve us in using Dr. Scott's example. She fell outside of her house and she hurt her arm. A neighbor ran over to check in on her and asked her how she was doing. And she was like, oh, I'm in a lot of pain. And the neighbor looked at it. The neighbor was not a medical professional and said, oh, it looks fine. I don't think it's broken. Dr. Scott appreciated that, but decided to go see a medical professional. The medical professional did an x-ray and indeed the bone was broken. Dr. Scott had a decision here to make. Who is she going to listen to? Her neighbor? A wonderful person, smart person, or her doctor? Now her bias there led her to trust her doctor, and that was a good bias. Now in taking that metaphor a little bit farther, or excuse me, that example a little bit farther, a maladaptive bias would be if Dr. Scott had maybe gone to two doctors, maybe the first one was younger than Dr. Scott specifically, and Dr. Scott's like, ooh, that person's really young. I don't know if I can trust their judgment. And then she goes to somebody older and trusts that person's judgment, whether or not the older person's judgment was actually accurate. That would be maladaptive. When the decisions that we're making are not based in a person's expertise, experience, and person, but they're based on seen or unseen aspects of their cultural or social identities that create stories about them that often are not true. What are the stories that we're telling? Before we answer some of those questions, I want to personalize this and ask you to anonymously share how you have encountered bias within your life based on some of your cultural and social identities. Again, this is personal. It's an invitation. You may or may not want to do so in the chat, depending on your level of comfort. But again, let's hope that this poll works. What is one word that others have used to describe or define you that is actually not true about you? It should be up and running. Yes. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. The larger the word is, the more often somebody has used it. I'm seeing arrogant, aggressive, emotional, condescending, closed, pushover, ambitious, nice, fragile, heterosexual, fake. I'll give you a few more seconds. Passive aggressive, sensitive, loud, yeah. Thank you. I'll give you, I see those words are still coming in, so I'll give you some time. Oof, stupid, closed. I think I said that. Good, good. Thank you. Thank you. Next question. What is one word that you use to describe yourself that you wish or hope others could see or would use about you? I'll give you about a minute here. As you continue to share, as these words are moving and I'm trying to follow them, caring, empathetic, strong, confident, compassionate, intelligent, empowered, friendly, creative, connected, capable, genuine, sensitive, friendly, non-judgmental, dependable, advocate. Good. I didn't get all of them as the screen is moving, but I trust that for those of you, thank you in the chat. This is really powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. I'll give you a few more seconds. And if you would, this should be in your guide. And even if it's not, write these things down. Write down the stories that are not true about you. Cross them out, whether that's with your hand, whether it's on a device, and then write the stories about yourself that are true. And surround yourself with people who are going to honor who you are. And if you need help with that, I'll help you with that after this presentation. Not directly after, but later on. This is something that's a big deal. Thank you. I'm going to invite you to the chat now. All right, and there's some questions here, and I've built in a lot of time to this presentation because I really want to hear from you. First question: how does it feel to be unfairly judged? We're going to be comfortable in this silence while you process your thoughts. If you don't feel comfortable sharing out loud, you can private message me and I will not share your name. I hope that works. Hurtful. Tiring. Oh. Exhausting, sad. Trapped, draining. Depressed. Oof, that I don't matter. Shortchanged. Misunderstood. Discouraging. Hurtful, tiring, sad, misunderstood, that I don't matter. Love it. Let's take about 10, 15 more seconds to share as you're comfortable and able. And again, as you have questions coming up, you're welcome to share them in the Q&A, unappreciated, muted or silenced. This is breaking my heart. I want to honor all of your feedback here, the fact that you've shared these things. Thank you. And I want to also express gratitude for your willingness to be an advocate in places where other people may not have been an advocate toward you. I hope that you can feel seen and heard and like you belong. And I hope, for so many of us, I feel like for those of us who have been most marginalized, those of us who haven't been heard or seen or made to feel like we belong, we are the ones who feel that sense of responsibility to create atmospheres like that for others. And I don't know that that's how it should be. I think that's how it is often. But I want to say thank you. More stuff is coming, exhausting and devalued. And I hope you're hearing that. For any of you who have not had stories told about you, there's no shame here. But I want you to recognize that there is a power and a privilege in your ability to say that nobody has told an untrue story about you. But you, in moving into anti-racist advocacy, whether or not you've had stories told about you or not, this is how people are made to feel when untrue stories are told about them. Next question. What stories, and this is taking ownership, no matter what we've been through. I can say that in junior high, I was ferociously bullied for being one of the only people of color, one of the only people with a funny sounding name, funny in air quotes, one of the only people to have a parent who was born in a different country and who had an accent that other people couldn't always understand what they were saying. And sometimes that tempted me to tell unfair stories about others to make me feel like I belong, and it was wrong. So what stories, whether or not we've been excluded or not, have we told that unfairly judge others? I'll give you time in the chat. That people can't change. Oof, that's a good one. Yeah, you don't have to be specific, but you can. And you could be specific to a particular social or cultural identity too. Understanding that we are in a safe space and that you will not be, I will not judge you for sharing. That the other side is evil. Yes, thank you for that. I really want to call attention to this in this. I know this is going to be a webinar, or this is a webinar. We are coming off of an election within Arizona specifically and throughout the United States. And so I sometimes situate the other side with politics. And sometimes we don't want to sit at the table with somebody who thinks differently than we, that they are unintelligent. Yes, that they have little or no integrity. Yeah, I think we do this a lot. This I'm right, they're wrong. Sometimes unfair judgments when people do not have the same positions on political issues that for me appear to be non-negotiable. Yeah. It's people's fault that they are facing challenges, homelessness, drug addiction, poverty, while totally disregarding the systemic issues. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's so true. And I think that's embedded in our culture of assumption and entitlement that, hey, I worked hard. If you worked hard, you wouldn't have this issue too. Totally, completely dismisses systemic issues and any of our privilege. And we're going to get to that. All right. Yes, other side is evil, unintelligent, and assuming it is coming from hate instead of hurt. Yes. The opposite side are stupid, that they have an agenda, that they're ill-intentioned. Yes. And I think that there is a both and here. And I'm not saying this to negate any of these comments. First of all, thank you for sharing them. But to say that we can absolutely sit at the table with somebody and not judge them. A part of empathy, there are 4 components of empathy. The first is to see the world as others do. The second is to understand, not feel, another's emotions. The third is to remain non-judgmental. And the fourth is to communicate an understanding of that person's worldview or mindset or emotions to them and be accurate about that. Those are the four components of empathy, according to Wiseman. And so I wanted to mention here, going into compassion, boundaries are an act of compassion. And for people whose ideologies are misaligned in the sense that they are actively harmful to you and your social identity and your way of being, that I can say you can put up a boundary and you can refuse to engage in conversation. And there's a difference there. That they have an agenda, ill-intentioned, excellent, excellent. Thank you. Third question. This is a little bit hard, slightly esoteric, but let's give it a shot. How might we tell true stories? Spoiler alert, this is part of being an anti-racist advocate. And it's also anti-sexist and anti-ableist and anti-ageist and anti-classist. By being truthful with ourselves, yes, with heart. Give you the silence here is waiting for you to respond, focusing on facts here. I'm asking people what they'd like others to know about them. You know, I feel that that should be a given, but so often we assume things of people, or we assume that it's other people's business. Asking without assuming is huge in the work of anti-racist or anti-anyist advocacy, and it is huge in the work of cultural intelligence. Assuming good intent, recognizing the systemic issues that lead to societal problems, stop blaming the individual when they are truly not 100% responsible. Absolutely. By being curious before telling any story. I love it. If any of y'all are Ted Lasso fans, and I'm a huge fan, in the first season, Ted says to his nemesis, be curious, not judgmental. Here, Ted. Listening with purpose. One of the most inspiring workshops I ever had was with a group of senior leadership several months back. And one of the leaders said, you know, I always listen to lead. And they stopped and said, I'm going to start listening to learn before I lead. That's leadership, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, broadening your worldview. So keep going as I say this, and I want to say that so much of advocacy in listening is truly empathy and compassion, which is why I embedded in that CI model. And so many people unfairly bias these skills. And they say, oh, these are soft skills. These are female skills. And listen, if they're female skills, that's empowering to me as a female. Good. I'm glad they're empathy and compassionate. That's a compliment, even though it's meant to be pejorative. These are not soft skills. The research says that when we lead with empathy, perspective taking, and compassion, putting our empathy into action, doing something about what we've learned to alleviate somebody's burden, that is actually creating cultures of belonging in which people have established loyalty and trust, and they stay with us. They stay with their companies. In light of this great turnover that I just talked about, these are leadership skills that I'm telling you, if we do not embody more as we move into the 21st century, we're already deep into it, our organizations are not going to thrive. In fact, some of them might actually collapse. Great. Excellent. Thank you for your participation. Now we're going to take a look at what influences these stories. This is looking at cultural awareness, understanding racism. We're on guide page 8. Here we go. and you've already done it. This is on the image here. It's a definition of racism by Singh from her book, oh my gosh, I will get it in just a second. On this definition of racism, click on the words that stick out to you most. And here's the definition. I'll read it for those of you who might be visually impaired. Racism is a system of oppression that relies on beliefs that one race or group of people is superior to another based on biological characteristics like skin color, facial features, and hair. So click on the words that stick out to you most. I'll give you a little bit of time. Great, excellent. Yes, thank you, Alexandra. For those of you who need to access the poll again, you can do so on the screen, and Alexandra kindly shared in the chat how you might do that as well. Great. And quickly, this is on your guide on page 20. The text here is the Racial Healing Handbook, again, by Annalise Singh. It's a fantastic book that I recommend to people to engage, and had a lot of activities in it too. But this is one of my favorite definitions of racism because it truly is all encompassing. So I see the word that is clicked on the most is oppression, then beliefs, then characteristics, system, and superior. Yes, think of those words. Is an oppressive system based on the beliefs that we have that we're superior, based on our characteristics that are biological. We cannot control our biological characteristics. Some of us can, maybe through surgery, but that's about it. There has to be a physical alteration. And yet there's entire systems built to the exclusion of those who don't have these biological characteristics. So when we identify racism, we want to pay attention to the attitudes of mind and those four that I talked about. We want to evaluate the stories that we hear, that we tell, and that we believe. Because it's one thing to hear something, it's quite another to believe them. And then finally, are we investigating power, privilege, and influence? If not, here we go. Power is defined as the ability to direct and influence behavior, events, and allocation of resources. So thinking about it and offering up some examples that some of you mentioned you wanted to hear. If we are in an organization, those with power are the ones who are controlling the budget. They're controlling how much we can pay people. They control whether the new hire gets paid more than the people in the same position who've been there 5-10 years. They control whether or not they're going to have pay equity and pay the people who've been there 5-10 years the same as the new hires, not just to get the new hire in the door. People who have power in organizations, let's say corporate, nonprofit, are the ones who can see where there's misalignment in maybe people at the top and people not so close to the top don't have access to the same healthcare benefits, to the same amount of flexibility, to the same amount of raises, understanding that a 1% raise for some people is quite delightful, because that 1% could be such a large ultimate number. And for others, it's mere pennies often. Looking at the equitableness of systems. In academia, this might be a professor who privileges their own identities on the syllabi, who demands perfect English, who demands that people get things done in a certain amount of time, despite neurodiversity, who expects all students to understand the cultural perspectives that the professor themselves have and the students may not share, that only offers texts, whether that be videos, online, or physical texts, that are from the same cultural identities. And those identities are usually rooted in whatever is dominant within a particular culture. We'll walk through that in just a moment. In taking a look at privilege, this is a form of societal power that is unearned. It is derived from our age. We can't count when we were born, or our race, or our gender, or a gender identity, whether or not that is one that is biological or one that is identified later in life. Our socioeconomics as children and also as adults, our ability, our religion, our politics, politics not necessarily a privilege, but it can be, and our societal standing. Recognizing that throughout the world, colorism is real. Colorism is a subset of racism in which people who already have darker skin tones judge each other on the spectrum of skin color, often privileging those with lighter skin tones over people with darker skin tones. Acknowledging here caste systems that are still active around the world. So now I would like to invite you to go to page 10 in your guide. This is an activity that we have called Power Flower. Please don't touch the flower yet because it is interactive and it might be a little bit glitchy. I'm still figuring out InDesign. Technology is wonderful, but sometimes we love it. It doesn't always love us back. So what I would like you to do, and again, this is private. You will not be sharing any of these answers aloud unless you want to. Around this flower are 8 social identities. At the top, I will explain them in just a minute. As you go through, there's a box in your guide right under the identity, not on the petal, a box right under between the petal and the identity marker. I would like you to write in your social identity within these boxes. That's all I want you to do for now. As you're doing that, I'm going to explain what each means. Top, racial ethnic identity. This, of course, is your race: white, Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native American, Middle Eastern, or your ethnic identity, and your country of origin, if that's relevant, if it's non-USA. Your gender identity. And this could be biological sex, or this could be your current gender identity. Your social class during childhood, whether you were poor, middle class, upper middle class, wealthy. Your ability status, whether or not you have any disabilities, whether that be physical, mental, emotional. Your sexual orientation, your religion, your family dynamic. Are you married, single, divorced, polyamorous? Do you have children? And your education level or role at work. Again, do not click on the petals yet. Somebody in the chat says, I have to admit, I am thinking about Elon Musk. I will have to say that that is a very, very astute observation, especially in Elon Musk's rise to power recently with Twitter and some of the things that are happening. And in the case of history, understanding that webinars often are evergreen, this is where we are in this time in history, is Twitter kind of going up in flames, if you will, in my estimation. Others might see it differently. All right, I trust that you have filled those out. Again, you will not be sharing unless you would like to share. So this is what I would like you to do, and hopefully your flowers work. As I go through, I am going to reveal within the United States, recognizing that across the world, these power structures might be different, the dominant identity within this nation that I'm currently in, and many of you are in the US. If your identity matches the one that I have on the petal, you can keep that petal. If it doesn't, I want you to click the pedal and the pedal should disappear. Sometimes two disappear at once. Listen, you might have to do this in your mind's eye. We're going to get this technology to work by 2025. I'll be ambitious. All right. And then at the end, I'll explain to you what this means. So for race or ethnic identity, if you are white or US born, you can keep this pedal. If not, you click that pedal and it should disappear. Next, gender identity. If you're a cis male identifying, so that means that you are not transgender male, but you're cis male identified. You were born male biologically. And you still identify as male. I need to add that. Social class during childhood, you're upper or middle class. If that's you, you can keep this pedal. If not, please click. Ability status, you have no physical, mental, emotional disability or need for access or medication or accessibility / accommodation. They're not the same, but you are heterosexual or straight. You are Christian, and I comprise a lot of the subsets of Christianity there. You are married with children. And people ask me all the time, how is that? Well, think about our income tax. When we're married, we have a lot of breaks. And when we have children, we have even more breaks, and with health insurance as well. And sometimes our society is just privileged toward. I have a colleague who identifies as being gay, and in their company, in their office during the pandemic, the two people who identified as being gay were asked to be there physically in the office since they didn't have children. That is leadership, ladies and gentlemen, that is biased, and that is not creating a culture of belonging. And I am sorry right now that I referred to you all as ladies and gentlemen and gendered you. I apologize for that. I'll say my friends instead. And then for those of you, whether you have a doctorate, if that's relevant to your career, the highest level of education, or you are in a position of leadership. So some of you are going to have a full flower, all 8 petals. Some of you will have a few petals, and some of you will have no petals. The more petals you have, the more privilege you likely have in the United States. Again, you don't have to share your level of power and privilege, but I also want to say that so often men who are identifying, are cis male identifying, and also who are white, but who did not grow up with wealth, have a hard time seeing privilege, and their own privilege at that. And I understand that, and I empathize with that deeply, because poverty prevents so much access to so many things. However, I want to point out that if there are several of us lined up, maybe different gender identities, different racial identities, and a mix of that, and all of us start from the same socio and economic standing, and maybe that is of being more poor, the likelihood of the white male being able to progress farther and further more quickly than any of those other people with the different identities is highly likely, based on a system that is advantaged toward white maleness. So that's not to say that you did not have to work hard, and that you did not pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that you hustled. It's to say that your white maleness provided you boots. And not having maleness, not having whiteness, those are boots. And what equity seeks to do is give people boots, whether it's giving scholarships for boots, giving people boots, lowering the price of boots. Well, however we're getting people boots, everybody now has boots, so we can all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Equality is making sure everybody's got boots. Okay, so is there a way to retrieve the petals back? Yes and no. You can close the document. Don't save. Close the document, reopen. Hopefully you've saved already, or you can just pretend. I am trying to fix this. My friends, if any of you have technological savvy with InDesign, talk to me, because I would love to get this thing fixed, because it can be glitchy. So yes, this is a very eye-opening. My flower is missing many petals. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so quick chat. How do levels of privilege impact the amount of power one has in an organization? You tell me in the chat. How do levels of privilege impact the amount of power one has in an organization? The ability to obtain resources. Yes, I'll give you a few more. Yes. The ability to persuade and influence others. Access. Ability to have great ideas and then have them implemented. Yes, it's not just having the great ideas, it's having them implemented, being heard. Yes. Take a few more seconds. Leadership may unconsciously value your words over others due to bias. 100%. Yes. Drive systemic direction. Yes, yes, yes. You can keep sharing. I'm going to move forward for the sake of time. Thank you. I want to say this, that there are many of us who don't have a full flower. And I want to remind us that even if we lack power, we can influence despite our levels of power and privilege. Influence here is defined as their ability to deeply affect behaviors and beliefs. So listen, that might not be systemic, but it might be more communal. I had this experience once where I realized that even though my title told me, this was in a job many years ago, that I had power, I realized that I did not have power because of a toxic leadership culture that asked for quote unquote expertise, but never implemented it. So they were disempowering their leaders. And then their leaders, therefore, could not receive feedback from those who were reporting to us because we knew it was never going to get anywhere. So what we had to do is we had to circumvent upper management or the C-suite, if you will, and we had to use our influence to basically shepherd those who were within who we were supervising. It was toxic. It was nightmarish. We all felt stuck. And many of us were there for the insurance. I will say that. And most of us, all of us left because it was a toxic situation. And what it taught me, that whether or not you have power, you still can wield influence. And even if it's everybody leaving, that will indicate to those who are hopefully, who are at the C-suite or the highest levels, that there is a systemic issue. Now, if they change it, that's on them and they can continue to see that turnover. But ultimately, I want to recognize the deep pain and hurt caused, whether or not we have power or privilege, when we are not able to create change. But I adjure you and I adjure myself, where can we impact with influence, whether that's mentorship, whether that's saying hi when you come into the office. There are things that we can do, whether it is seeing that people feel unseen by leadership and you allowing them to feel seen. That's a lot. That's a burden to put on you. But as advocates, sometimes with boundaries, how might we do that to change the system from the inside out? And if it refuses to change, then we have a decision to make if we have the power and privilege to do so. There's a lot of ifs here. And hopefully by doing that, we can build loyalty and trust. So then, how might those of us who lack power use our influence to change systems? This is a hard one, and this is where a lot of us are. Serve as micro-influencers, one relationship at a time, here. Validating feelings and letting others know that they are not the only ones. Yes. Give you a few more minutes, or not minutes, seconds. I love these. I love these. As you're sharing, I'm going to move forward because I have collective bargaining, leverage communication strategies. Yes, yes. And when you can speak up, do so. I want to invite you, not now, on guide pages 11 and 12, after the Power Flower activity, to engage some of the prompts. There's a checklist provided by NAFSA that takes a look at levels of influence, what you can do, and it has an accountability checklist. Use this, implement it, refer to it. I give it to you as a resource. So now we're moving to guide page 9. Understanding cultural responsiveness and anti-racism. Let's move into how we might change the narrative and create anti-racist systems and societies. Next poll, taking a look at this definition of anti-racism. I hope you can see it. On this definition of anti-racism by the NAC International Perspectives on Women in Global Solidarity, click on the words that stick out to you most. Anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. As you're sharing that, I see find where your base of power is. Yes, French and Raven. Yes, yes, yes. That is a citation. I love citations. And politely share my experiences with others who are willing to listen. Yes. Look for similarities with others who are different. Yes, yes, yes. Excellent. So thank you for your participation here. The word I see is active, then eliminating, then equitably, then identifying, changing, and shared. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So in kind of parsing out that definition to create anti-racist organizations, in what order must these changes occur? So now what I would like you to do is you can take the answers and you can slide or you can move them and reorder them. So as systems, organizational structures, policies, practices, attitudes, which one comes first all the way to fifth? You can move these around. Let me make sure that this is all working. Working? Yes, I see that it is working. Oops. All right, I just activated it. Oh, poll everywhere. I'm not sure what's going on today. You know what? Poll everywhere knew that I was hosting a webinar today, and that's why it decided not to work today. I know that that's the issue. I kid. Good, thank you. So go ahead and slide them and reorganize the order. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. I see attitudes, then policies, then practices, then organizational structures, and then systems. So I would tend to agree with the majority here that believe that attitudes have to come first. So when we take a look at all of the isms we've been talking about, we see that addressing attitudes, changing narratives, and then reorganizing systems, structures, and policies are what it takes. But we've got to address the attitudes first, which starts with the biases and the stories we tell. and then changing those narratives or stories. That's how we end up reorganizing system. It takes time. Ibram X. Kendi says the work of anti-racism takes 7 to 10 years organizationally to implement. So here, we can call people in. Here's the how. We want to address bias. Wood has a framework for microaggressions. Microaggressions are pejorative, subtle insults. These include verbal, nonverbal, environmental, or visual actions. It might be imitating somebody's disability. It might be telling a woman that she's smart for a woman. It might be asking someone, where they're from just because they might look ethnic, and not believing them when they tell you where they're from. So addressing that, maybe calling them out and calling them in, not out. Saying, when you ask that, what do you mean by that I'm smart for a woman? Or pulling somebody aside or doing it publicly. This entirely is based on context and even personality. If somebody makes a visual gesture that makes fun of, let's say, somebody with a disability, I would say we don't tolerate that kind of ableism here. Or I pull them aside. When you did that, it was to the exclusion of people with disabilities. And it says the message that our company accepts that kind of behavior. And I hope in your saying that you can refer back to company values, which promotes atmospheres of inclusion. If not, you might want to revisit your company values. I'm tucking in a lot of strategies here. Some of you may or may not have access to change. All right, you also want to look at mansplaining. I work with C-suite leadership all the time, which is mostly men. And a big thing that they are holding each other accountable to is mansplaining, which is when a woman says something or doesn't say something or something happens, that a man either repeats what she says back to her as if she needed to know what she just said, or explains something in a way assuming that she doesn't know. All right, it's very condescending. And then creating those accountability tools and measures, creating values that the company not just sticks up on a website, but implements into their culture through accountability tools, recognizing when people are upholding them, holding people to quarterly or biannual meetings, saying, okay, did you do this? Having a system of reporting without retribution, having a way of making sure that we can hear from everybody through a number of different tools, right? Ruchian Tulsian, who wrote Inclusion on Purpose, which is an intersectional approach to centering the workplace experiences of women of color who are both subject to gender and racial bias. She debunks the idea of a, quote, level playing field in business. And she explains how leaders and organizations can use their privilege for good to identify and expose bias, knowing that leaders, primarily if they are white males, or even Black males, but males in general tend to have a lot more power, knowing that these people in power typically have less to lose in speaking up than a woman of color does. Again, that's Inclusion on Purpose by Ruchian Tulsian. If you go to our website, you can, and there's in the guide, there's resources, you can see some of these texts, and that's toward the back of your guide. All right, now let's say that it's not happening. You don't have power, but you do have influence. So this happened during the Obama administration, as revealed in this article, the simple trick women in the White House used to stop getting interrupted. They used a technique called amplification. What they were finding is that, let's say we were at a table full of people and a woman named Brittany says something. Well, a man named Tom repeats what Brittany says, and nobody acknowledges that Brittany said it first. Everybody acknowledges that Tom said it. And this was not flying. And so what these women did is they made a point. If Brittany said something, then Tamara would say, "Ooh, I love what Brittany just said. Brittany just said this." And then Tamara repeats what Brittany says, constantly saying Brittany's name. And Tom doesn't even have a chance to mansplain or to take what Brittany says. And now the attention is turned back on Brittany, the author of the idea. The men in the room, as it were, including President Obama, started listening to their opinions. Sometimes we got to advocate for ourselves, and we got to just make it happen. Here's an example from academia. This happened with a faculty member that I worked with recently through the School of Life Sciences at Arizona State University. This is what they wrote in their syllabus. In an ideal world, science would be objective. However, much of science is subjective and is historically built on a small subset of privileged voices that excluded the participation and contributions of others. In creating this course, the instructor and the department instructional designers endeavor to represent individuals of diverse backgrounds in the reading, content, and media used in this class, and to recognize the immense contributions of scholars and scientists from all ethnicities and national origins, gender and gender identity, sexuality, class, and religions. However, we acknowledge that it is possible that there may be both overt and covert biases in the material due to the lens with which it was written, even though the material is primarily of a scientific nature. Integrating a diverse set of experiences thus is important for a more comprehensive understanding of science. When I saw that, I raised my hands in the air and celebrated. It's a start. It's a start, I'm saying, that recognizing the system, this person is empowered to change the syllabus, to implement curriculum that is reflective of the students' identities. The research says, I'm particularly, my doctoral research is centered around the inclusion of students in the university. So hear me out here, but I will say that the research absolutely moves over to corporate spaces. When the people we are trying to serve feel included in the decision-making process, their ability not only to engage, but succeed increases. And so those of us in leadership, it is our responsibility, if we want to be anti-racist advocates, to make sure that we are including representation from an already diverse constituency, that we are including representation from an already diverse constituency. Diversity is a fact. What are we doing to create inclusive cultures? This is anti-racist advocacy, looking at that diversity and asking the question, and this is now rooted in cultural openness, going back to that CI model. Who is at the table? And more importantly, who is not at the table? Upholding equity and cultural awareness. Does everyone at the table have fair access to opportunities? Does everyone at the table feel like they have a voice? How are we gauging what the people at the table are saying? Are we doing it? Are we allowing them to speak verbally at meetings? Are we allowing them to speak non-verbally through other mechanisms like sending out a survey privately and anonymously? Are we allowing people to see our agenda well in advance? Let's say 24 hours is a good practice. So it's not just the on-the-spot thinkers who are contributing at meetings, but it's people, whether they have neurodiversity, whether they're second or other language learners, whether they're more introverted and need time, or internal processors, all of these kinds of things. How are you including them at the table? And finally, inclusion and belonging. Do the people at the table feel seen, heard, and like they belong, which means that you haven't just taken a survey and left the results on some database, that you haven't just invited them to the table and allowed them to speak, but you've actually taken their feedback and you've implemented it into your systems. You've changed as a result of what you've learned. That's leadership. And so in moving toward accountability, there's more post-work guidance in the guide. There's a CI assessment toward the beginning. This is all in your table of contents. And you can click through the table of contents to get there. So insofar or so long as you've downloaded the guide and saved it first. If you just open it, it's not going to work. There are reflection prompts and there's checklists and reminders. So a reminder for cultural intelligence, cultural awareness. Are you evaluating the stories that we are told? Are you examining the origin of these biased stories? Looking at cultural responsiveness, are we telling true stories? And are we being anti-racist advocates? Final poll. In one word, describe how you want to move forward as an anti-racist advocate. Genuinely, confidently, intentional, active, convener, love it, kindly, courageous, bravely, I don't think I had said that. Intentional is getting bigger and bigger, bravely is getting bigger, openly. Excellent. Boldly. Very good. All right. If you're interested in learning more on how you can do this, on page 21 of the guide is a little bit more information about CITC, culturally intelligent training and consulting. We provide strategic CI training. We do webinars like this. We have ongoing training. We do not like to do one-off workshops because that is pretty performative, but we will partner with you ongoing. Leadership consulting, accountability tools, DEI committee support, conversation design, team building through the Enneagram, which is a personality inventory, and cultural competency through the intercultural development inventory. I want to say thank you. Thank you to you for your attention, your participation, your interaction, your vulnerability, your candor, and to DLA for inviting me here again. Now we'll take questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to stop sharing. And also, Alexandra shared in the chat a survey to share with us about this information. So however we're doing the Q&A, I'm ready.
Oh, Renee, you are so refreshing, right, Brent? That was like, my little pen was smoking over here. I'm like,
Oh yeah, always.
I have a few more things to write down. It's tremendous. And I love the information. And, for those of us that do this work, I love that we're always able to elevate the conversations and understand what it takes to activate, right? There's an activation piece that I love that we're ending the year with. Brent, I think we had one question that was posted that is still open that I would love for us to answer.
Yes, that is correct. But everyone, please add into the Q&A area your questions for Renee today. We don't want to let her off that easy. She's good at answering these questions. That's a little ribbing because she is a brand new doctor. So congratulations on that as well again, and for your promotion too, because we haven't spoken since then. But can you talk a little bit about having an invisible disability might influence your power? If people don't outwardly perceive your disability, how does that affect the way people view you within your organization?
Thank you, Brent. Thank you for this, this question. And then Joanna, did you want to speak to it as well?
No, I'll have you start.
So what's interesting about this is that I don't actually know, and none of us knows how it might impact the way that people view us, because those are attitudes and I can't always gauge people's attitudes unless I survey them. But what I can say is that a lot of people with invisible disabilities might center some of their strengths. And also what happens is that a lot of times people with invisible disabilities hide their pain. And so what the assumption might be is that other people might look at them as being these beacons of strength and might actually project onto them all sorts of narratives, going back to those stories we tell of who this person is, what they have capacity to do, how they might do it, and even create comparisons, which are not fair because you never know people's invisibilities and also are people invisible disabilities. Can you tell that I've been talking for 2 hours? The other thing to remember is that even people with shared disabilities have different ways of being and different capacities. I happen to have an autoimmune a disability that impacts a lot of my health and my everyday. However, I'm also a person with a lot of capacity. So people don't always know about my disabilities. But what that also does for a lot of people, even people with the same shared disabilities, is, well, Renee's doing that. Why can't I do it? That is not an okay story to tell because you have different capacity. So that's what I want to remind people is don't infer strength or weakness on others. Don't assume anything. And for those of us who are in leadership, well, it's nobody's business to know everything about ourselves. Sometimes it is empowering for people to know our limitations in order for them to celebrate all of the strengths that we can bring to the table.
Absolutely. And this really resonates with me when I was reading the question, because my son is on the autism spectrum and he's a sophomore at ASU. And I think what has always been just very powerful to me is that people make the assumption, well, look how far you've gotten. So things must be working for you, right? You must, and not understanding that there's so much emotion that you said it, Renee, that he has to hide, right? Because he feels like he can't process it in this very visible way because people have such high expectations of where he is. But it is one where, and I've told him that what you've done is you've taught them, right, that it's okay. And what you need to start to do is change the narrative to say, I am struggling, and be okay with that. And have the struggle be something other than just your disability. He's like, there are days where I just have a freaking headache. Like, it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm on the autism spectrum. I had a little too much sugar, my head is banging. And so people are like, AJ, are you okay? Do we need to do something? He's like, no, I just need to take Motrin. Like, do you know what I mean? It's one of those where, so I've always told him to just sharing his experiences profound, especially, people always go, well, he doesn't look like, and I'm like, what does that mean? That always troubles me when people say he doesn't look like he could be on the spectrum. And I'm like, okay, we're not gonna make those, broad, overarching, judgmental statements where they don't, relate to everyone. So that definitely resonates with me, the question about, this idea of invisible disabilities, and kind of how do you influence your power around that. I wanted to just read very quickly a comment that Cliff Moon made, which is in reference to, he was asking if we have heard of the work of Dr. Donna Hicks. So I had not, but you're nodding, Renee.
Yes, what I love, thank you, Cliff, for this. So I have recently been exposed to Dr. Donna Hicks, Hicks, who has a dignity model for resolving conflict. And I love her model so much. And I'm a recent recipient of this knowledge, but yes. Although my work has not been directly influenced, there is a lot of alignment there. And so thank you for saying that, because that's a deep honor to have her name come up in the same work that I do. And then I see another one in the chat about reverse racism. How do you respond to people who want to blame their lack of success on reverse racism? I try to deal everything with empathy, even though sometimes I get a little exhausted by this, because those kinds of ideas are rooted in privilege and power. Because what it's saying, and this is from Tara J. Frank, who has a book called The Waymakers, which came out this year as well. She says that what this indicates is that people with privilege and power believed that those opportunities were theirs to begin with. That if you are upset that somebody of color or a woman got this opportunity at you and you didn't, what does that say about your sense of entitlement? And I'll leave that there.
We could do this for like hours, just so you know, and we look forward to bringing you back again to continue this conversation. I love the idea that you started us off and you ended the year so that we come full circle. I think that sort of closure is powerful in terms of next steps, strategy, implementation. So Renee, thank you so much. We are so grateful for your time. We really value and honor it. And really happy that you were able to join us again to close out the year. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you,
What
Judy.
we do here at DLA is so important, but I just want you all to know we can't do it. It is not possible without the contributions from our volunteers, our sponsors, our fellow board of director members. And I just want to give recognition to a few people that you don't see, but they're behind the scenes, making sure everything is running smoothly. So that is our DLA board of director members that really help the strategy move along. And I also want to mention our education team. And there are several members that are helping. There's our amazing education team led by Ms. Tondra Richardson, who you heard at the beginning of the program. But in particular, today's program we had some very special help from education team members May Dobbins and Alexandra Escobar, and also Dr. Brent Scholar. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am grateful for the help and for just all of the volunteer work. We know that it takes a lot to get, something extra on your plate, but we are very, very grateful for that. Also want to make sure we thank Maria Radloff, who is our webmaster. She is amazing. And she is the one that's responsible for all of our digital content. So when you see our YouTube channel and those programming go up, when you see our website design and things like that, that is my good friend, Maria Radloff with Via Maria. We really would not be able to do these workshops without sponsorship dollars. And while we have many amazing sponsors, I see some of them on there now. You can see PetSmart Charities. I think I saw one on there. And so we want to thank Mayo Clinic and Tegna Foundation. They're the ones directly responsible for supporting the monthly workshops. So I just have a quick call, a little plea. If you've enjoyed today's workshop and the content, would you consider making a donation? We're just asking organizations to help us keep the workshops and content like this complimentary to the community. So we are a nonprofit organization and your donations may be tax deductible. Make sure you consult your tax advisor. But if you would consider that, we would be honored if you would just help us keep the work going. You will see that we also are taking interest forms for our 2023 planning sessions. So if you want to volunteer, we'll have an education committee interest form. And if you stay to the end of the webinar, the survey link will come up automatically. Would love to just hear your thoughts on our work and what we could be doing more to elevate your experience here at DLA. Thank you again to Dr. Renee Bhatti-Klug. Always a pleasure. Such an edifying conversation. We're just humble and grateful for the subject matter of anti-racism and how we can all be advocates in our workplace. Most importantly, we here at DLA are thankful to each of you, our attendees, for taking your time and giving us your attention today. And before I end today, I want to shout out someone very special, a very special and blessed happy 79th birthday to longtime DLA volunteer, Miss Betty Thompson. Betty, we love you. Cheers to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday. I think we don't recognize and celebrate each other enough. Thank you for joining us. Take care of yourself, take care of each other. A happy and blessed Thanksgiving to you. Enjoy the time with your family and friends. Mwah. Cheers.
Unity.